Hi, welcome to Talking Books and Stuff, the program that talks all about books and writing and stuff. Here's your host, Dennis Rimmer.
Welcome back. It's another edition of Talking Books and We're Writing and Stuff. Today we're talking with Madeline Sonik. The book in discussion is called Queasy, and we'll get to that and much more in a moment. But first of all, Madeline Sonik, thank you very much for taking some time to chat with us today.
Well, thank you for asking me.
And this is great. Madeline Sonik, author and professor, PhD, and all of that stuff. But apparently you're born in Detroit but grew up in Windsor, Ontario. Is that true?
That's right, yes. I consider it, I grew up there. I lived there until I was about 14.
And what happened then was you went to England. So how did that come about?
Yes, well, my father died when I was 14, and then my mother, who was English, wanted to go back to the country of her origin. She believed that she was kind of going back to her youth, I guess, or her teenagehood that was very happy, but it turned out that, when she got back, it was in the 70s, and England was not in a very good state at that time. Unemployment was very high, cost of living was high. It was taxation was really high. So she went back looking for this kind of, a halcyon time in her life, and found actually the opposite. And so she stayed there for a year, and then she moved back. But I stayed in England, and I got a job. I dropped out of school in Canada, and I had gone to England, and I started working as a waitress, and then I got a job as a chambermaid, and so I stayed in England. Me and my mother, we had differences, and that was part of it. But also, I was just doing something that I felt, I was independent. I was making money, not good money, but enough to buy my cigarettes, and I had a place to live because I could live in the hotel as a live-in worker there. So that's basically the setting behind Queasy. It all begins when me and my mother go to live in England, and then what follows from there.
And when you're 14 and tumultuous things happen in a life, in any life, that must have been unsettling to say the least, to A, have a family member, a father die, and B, decide to move halfway across the world when you're in the grade 8, 9, 10 area?
Yeah, I was actually in grade 10 when I dropped out, like just the beginnings of grade 10. And I also, another thing that I talk about in this book is my first boyfriend, who I was really he became kind of the emotional center of my universe during the time my father was dying. My father's death happened very quickly, and basically what I think is like all of my everything that was unpleasant, I could get in the car with him. He was older than me, and he'd drive us off somewhere, and it just took me away from death and everything else. But then he broke up with me, too, so I had that, an additional emotional burden on the fact that my father was dead, and then my boyfriend broke up with me, and it was really, I went through a very, very bad time. But then, actually, moving to England was a very good thing. It was a good thing because it changed, the way I saw the world, and it gave me something else to kind of, live for and live in, and I had more agency there because I could work as a young, as a teenager, as a 15-year-old, I could work, and I could make my own money and make my own decisions and that kind of thing. And that was really, I think, very, very helpful. And I met a lot of important role models in my life that helped me a lot through a lot of my teenage struggling and angst. So it turned out, it seems like that would have been the kind of the last straw on the camel's back, right, to move to another continent. But in fact, that was a very fortuitous thing for me.
Well, in my case, I moved between grade 9 and 10 from Crescent Beach, BC, back to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. So I kind of know what you mean, but I didn't rebel and move back on my own or something. So I admire your courage for doing all of that. So the book is Queasy. Why did you call it Queasy?
It seemed to be a recurring theme, I think you write something and then you kind of look at what you have and things that keep coming up again and again. And there was this it started really with that whole idea of travel sickness, in one of the pieces in the collection, it's about the arriving in England and, riding in the car to my uncle's house and, like in England, all the turns in the roads, and in Devon, it's just like the hairpin turns and very, very sick making, and my little brother had been sick on the plane, and a lot of it just that idea of the turbulent time that does that almost to your psyche. It makes you always kind of feel that nausea, you can't quite feel settled in your body,
And back then, let's see, mid-70s, mid-8, that section of time in British English history was pretty unsettling with all the closures of mines and people being made redundant, I think they called it. And some people, I guess, are still suffering from that era. People who've never had a job in their life, I guess, not through fault of their own, just because of the economy. So, yeah, it must have been a strange sort of world for you to be dropped into.
Well, it was, but what was very interesting about that world and the way it changed over the course of the decades was when I was there, a Labour government was in, and Margaret Thatcher, the Conservative, was leader of the opposition, right? But in this Labour government, they were taxing wealthy people, like I think it was like 90% of their income. Like basically, that's why all the rock bands left England and went to California and stuff, and the Nobel Prize winners too, right? Like they weren't going to spend that amount of money, but basically, in the culture amongst the people, everybody was like their brother. Do you know what I mean? It was a very different feeling. Like everybody was really connected, and there was a kind of sense in that kind of labor government and that labor ethos of we're all in this together. But it was really the working class people who were all in this together, but you really felt that, like when you went to work as a chambermaid or as a waitress, or you connected with your the people that you worked with in a way that I've never connected with people that I've worked with since I came back from England. Like you know them and you say hi to them, but you don't really know them. Right. And so I think in some ways, as horrible as it was, the worst of times, in terms of the way people got on and helped each other and looked out for each other and all that, that was really something extraordinary. And I'm so fortunate that I actually had an opportunity to feel that, because going back to England many years later, after, the Conservative government changed a lot of things, and it became a completely different kind of world, and there was a lot more yuppies, like we'd never had yuppies when I was there, right? Yep. Nobody was a yuppie. We were all just, smoking our cigarettes, drinking our pipes, bitching about this and that, but, happy to kind of be together in that kind of situation.
Yep.
There was none of this kind of driving ambition. And I'm not saying, surely there's a place in between, there's got to be a road in between that's the best place to be. But anyway, it's just interesting that that's not the case anymore. I don't know if there's anywhere that I know of that you could go in the Western world where you would find that still, that camaraderie that existed,
Right, and I guess about the time you were there was the time we had the rise of the Sex Pistols and the Clash and Elvis Costello and the Damned and groups like that. So it must have been, did you sort of get involved in that scene at all?
Well, we had the Sex Pistons. The Sex Pistons. They were like the punk. That when I was there, that's when they took their boat down the Thames, and so. But I was very much into. I liked glam bands, and I liked a lot of hard rock bands. When I lived in Windsor, I had the opportunity there to kind of go to Cobo Hall and watch Aerosmith and Kiss, and those kind of bands, right?
Right.
And Rush. And actually, I one of the things that I used to do is I used to hang out backstage and try to get autographs, and so I'd meet some of these bands too. So I was into the music scene in that way. But in Devon, where I lived, there were no, they didn't have bands coming there. I had to go to London or whatever if I wanted to see a concert, and I wouldn't have had the money. I think I did when Rush came. I did go because I knew the band, so I wanted to go and see them and say hello, and so I did go. But it cost me a lot to do that.
Right. So Madeline Sonik is with us. The book we're talking about is Queasy, a memoir of sorts about time spent in England in the mid-70s and further on from there. So back to your personal story. Then you ended up having a PhD in writing, creative writing. How did you get from being a chambermaid in England and basically around just before Thatcher area to being a PhD?
My PhD is in education, actually, but I do have an MFA in creative writing.
Right.
So, what happened was I ever since my father died, when he died, I had this incredible desire to become a writer, but it really only happened after he died. And in retrospect, I believe it was part of my way of wanting to express the grief and everything that I felt that I couldn't express because it was a taboo thing in my family to express grief. You just could not do it. So I would write it all out, and it became very important, and I wanted to be a writer. And I've learned since that this happens to many creative people, right, that they take on a kind of creative life after the death of a parent. So, I'm fitting right in there, right? So anyway, I did want to be a writer. And then I started, saving up money to go to like this writer's workshop in England, Totley Barton, and I was fairly ignorant of most, good literature. I'd say, I knew the things I liked. Some of it was good, but some of it you would have thought, well, that's just, I don't think it, but a lot of people would say, well, that's not really. Because I like Lovecraft, for example. I like H.P. Lovecraft. I like a lot of the horror and the gothic and that kind of stuff. But anyway, I didn't know about, poetry, and I didn't know about a lot of these things that many of the people my age had learned about at school, and so I went to Totley Barton, and there I met a few people that were quite instrumental, I think, in helping me really hone my path to writing. But also, the other person I have to say really helped me was my employer, Mrs. Newell, who was my employer when I was a chambermaid. She was the head housekeeper, and she was very much into, you've really got to be realistic about this. If this is what you want, you've got to set goals. She was very much a coach for me in life, even though she wasn't a writer. Right. But at Totley Barton, I did meet a writer. Her name was Judith, and she was a journalist. And she and her husband had a news agency, is what they called them, where they wrote news stories and sold them to different newspapers. And she let me come and work with them and taught me how to write advertising features. That was the first thing that I did. So she was helpful. Also at Totley Barton, I met Ted Hughes, and the poet Ted Hughes, and yeah. I didn't know who Ted Hughes was, so I wasn't at all intimidated. I just thought this was like some farmer who had come over to Totley Barton, but he actually he did have a farm just across the way, and Totley Barton was one of his interests. That he kind of supported it. So he came over when we got snowed in, and there was a big field of sheep that were covered in snow, and he wanted to go out and dig up the sheep, and people were all intimidated because they knew who Ted Hughes was. And I'm thinking, like, who is it? He's a farmer. Yeah, I'll go out and help him dig out sheep. So that was something I did with Ted Hughes. He showed me how to dig a sheep out of the snow. And when I think of it as a metaphor, I mean, that is how you find a poem. You look in the snow, you look for the little the breath, the spirit of the sheep coming out of the snow, making little holes, and then you dig down and you dig it out. And so, yeah, that became my poetic metaphor, But generally, I think it put me in the right path. It put me in the place that I needed to be. And then the only way I could really go to school was to come back to Canada. I couldn't fit in with the educational system there. So I came back and got an equivalency at high school that allowed me to go to Western in London, and I did an MA there in journalism. And then and then after that, I had a family, and I did a lot of freelance work, and I did some teaching, community education. But then I went and did the MFA in creative writing, and then followed that by a PhD in education. So I guess, I don't know if that explains it, but to me it seems pretty straightforward. I know it sounds kind of not straightforward when you look at it from a distance, but it was a path, it was a path. And even now, today, I mean, I'm working on something else, but it's part of my trajectory in life,
And the book is Queasy, the main book here. Lots of other publications by Madeline Sonik, but Queasy, it's a bumpy journey through England in the 70s. It's a memoir. What kind of tips can you pass on for memoir writing to a lot of people? It seems to be in this day and age are doing memoirs.
Yeah, I guess, one thing is that if you look at my memoirs, a lot of them really aren't about me. They're about other people, really, and and which are far more interesting than me, right? For sure. And I think that's one thing with memoir. Really, you're never really writing about yourself. You're writing about those people that you know and you met and that you communicated with, and that meant something to you in your life. So I think that's kind of important. Having taught creative nonfiction, I see often that this is something that people confuse, right? They think that writing memoir means to write about me, right? But it doesn't really. It really isn't writing about you. It's writing about others.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I think I'd say. And I think the other thing I'd say was, when you're writing about others, always, like, after the fact, kind of look at what you've written and see how this applies to a bigger audience. That's important. And really, it's not, you don't have to necessarily do anything, just to see it. Because once you see it, then your whole writing changes, and everything you write then starts becoming for a bigger audience, It's not just a limited perspective. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And so what are you working on now? Is there anything you can tell us about?
Sure, I can. I'm working on another autobiographical book. And of course, it's not about me really so much as about a family inheritance. And the inheritance is of a gene, a genetic mutation, Lynch syndrome. And Lynch syndrome is a genetic mutation that makes people, gives them a propensity to get cancer at a very young age. Oh. And my father had this Lynch syndrome, and he died when he was 45. But of course, they didn't know how to find out, the cause of it then, or they didn't have the genetic know-how,
Right.
And my aunt also had this, Lynch syndrome gene, and she had the cancer, but she overcame it. She lived to be 80 or whatever, 88, I think, which, a nice old age.
Yeah.
And I've inherited that gene, right? So I want to write about this because, and I'm screened. I get regular screening, and I want to write about this because I feel like I've had an inside track on it. I've seen, my father die of it, and I remember things that he experienced, and I know how, the things that they say now, like, for example, get exercise, don't eat sugar, don't eat, right. Like a lot of fat, all this stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our diet in the 70s was like sugar and fat. That's basically what we ate,
Oh, yeah. I know. I was there in the 70s. I mean, that's all I had was cheeseburgers and beer.
Exactly, right? Yeah. So I just think, some of this, if it's maybe, and also not to fear these things too, like, because I think people are so afraid, oh no, I don't want to find out if I have a genetic mutation, it's good to know, because if you know, you can actually empower yourself, and you can be screened. There are things you can do, diet, exercise. I mean, all it means in knowing is you've kind of got, basically, you're in a better position than someone who doesn't know who has it, right?
Right.
I mean, that's the way I see it. Yeah. And I'm hoping that in some ways this will help people that maybe are ambivalent about getting tested, or, maybe have someone in their family that they think might have had it, and they don't know for sure. Because I think it's such a terrible thing. And the other thing about this book that I'm writing, so I did a 23andMe genetic test, right? As well as the genetic test I did to find out I had Lynch syndrome. I had to pay for that one. $5,000 I paid to have this Lynch syndrome gene done to find that I had it. But the 23andMe revealed that I had this cousin that I'd never met, and the second cousin actually, she lives in California, and she was contacted me and said, do you know anything about my father, because he left when I was a baby, he left my mother, and I understand I might have a half sister somewhere, and I don't know anybody in my family, so if you can give me any information. So I was actually able to put her in touch with that line of the family, and they were able to find out her half sister for her, and also that she had a half brother, which she didn't know about. But what she also didn't know was that she could have inherited Lynch syndrome. So I told her that. I told her about Lynch syndrome. I said, I hope you don't mind me telling you this. Maybe you don't want to hear it, but you may have this gene because it's rampant in our family, especially in your line.
Right.
So she went and she got tested, and she found out she had it, and they did a colonoscopy on her, and she had stage 3 cancer.
Oh.
So yeah. So I know, it was just like, whoa. It was like, she said, if I had not contacted you, it would have progressed, because I had no idea I had this, and nobody would have done this colonoscopy. I wouldn't have had it done, and
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it that was something I feel I really need to put into this book too. That knowledge friggin' is power. And knowing that you can actually do something, right? You can kind of change your fate.
Exactly. And before we let you go here, Madeline Sonik, talking about Queasy. It's published by Anvil Press out of Vancouver, BC. How'd you get in touch with Anvil, or what do you know about Anvil?
Anvil was they're in Vancouver, and they did my last memoir, Afflictions Departures, and when you ask me what I know they're a good publishing house, and I know that they take their authors very they're very helpful in the sense that they really try to promote their work and do what they can to make sure that the books are seen by many. Yep. It's very difficult for independent publishers, as you know. It's not an easy chore, and I feel that Anvil Press does a really, really good job. I'm quite. I really think they're very, very. They're very good. Most people will tell you that who work with Anvil too, that they feel good about working with them.
And they're the home of the 3-day novel writing contest too. So.
Oh yes, yeah. They are. They are now. I think there was one year when they weren't. I'm not sure, but right now they are. Yeah.
Yep. And actually, we talked to one of the winners just a while ago. Okay, Madeline Sonik, thank you very much for your time today. Have a great day over in Switzerland, and we'll maybe talk to you when this next book comes out.
Okay, talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for visiting with us today. This is Talking Books and Stuff with Dennis Rimmer. Contact him at dennis@talkingbooks.tk. Thank you, and may all the good news be yours. Oh, and don't forget to check out his book, The Great Canadian Notebook, available across Canada and at amazon.ca.